All right, so I'm here with the executive producer of this beautiful, magnificent film that I've watched and enjoyed. That's one of the perks of being a journalist is you get advanced copies of things. Tripping the Muskokas. And first of all, I was surprised that there was an S to Muskokas because as not a Toronto person, I thought there was only one. So why? I mean, this is not your first tripping, and we'll talk about this in a minute. But tell me why you picked those three lakes for this particular tripping.
Yeah, that's a good one because I think somebody told me 1,600 lakes, but what's a lake? I mean, it could be a moose pond. You had to sort of make a decision about what to do, and we spent some time there scouting and getting to know folks. And we said, okay, if we do just these three lakes, is that legitimate? If we call it the Muskoka Lakes, are people going to know exactly what we're talking about? And they assured us yes. And our director, John Morrison, spent 30 years there from the time he was a little kid, and he said, absolutely, that's perfectly legitimate. But you know what? We're gonna get pushback. Somebody's gonna say, well, I'm in Lake of Bays. Why weren't you there? So we'll get some pushback. But I think these are the Muskoka Lakes.
All right. This is not your first tripping, and I know with your wife you have this production company, and you guys do a lot of outdoorsy stuff and adventure stuff. And this is the second one of your tripping series that I've seen. I've also seen the French River, which I like very much. You've also done the Niagara. What else have you done in the tripping series, or is that it for now?
Well, our first one was the Rideau Canal.
Oh.
Yeah, and that one was 4 hours. So if it, and it was a way slower film because at that time we really believed that we needed to get it in one shot, and it was 4 hours. There were far few. We have these, as you saw, these sort of MTV style pop ups that sort of enrich the film and give you, a nice factoid about the place. So we had maybe half of what we had of those, and the Rito, we shot it and we knew, I remember, going down the Rito and looking at the monitor and going, like, this is really going to work. It was our first one. It was so beautiful. Like watching the monitor, I was watching the monitor as opposed to looking at the sides, off the sides of the boat, because I just thought this is so beautiful. And it happened that we shot long before the pandemic was even a word, but it happened to air during the pandemic. And I think that for a lot of people, those 4 hours were sort of a relief from, those days, right? There were some dark days.
And to timestamp this thing, we're recording now April 11th. No, 13. I don't know what date is.
11,
Yes,
yeah, you got it.
April 11th. Thank you. It's Friday. And your film comes out on TVO and on the platforms in 10 days or so. We're in the middle of an election campaign. In Ontario, we've had a provincial election. Now we're in the middle of a federal election. There's a Trump thing. Without getting you into politics, like your films are just so relaxing. And I just want to put this out there. If you're suffering from like too much information and doom scrolling itis, watching, or you don't actually have to watch the thing. That's what I wanted to confess to you is that when I was watching the French River and this one on the Muskokas, I mean, it goes on for a while and there's no narration. There's almost zero dialogue. What you hear, the sounds either of the river or the lake, the sounds as though you were in the boat with the folks who are in your documentaries. And just that, sometimes you just put it in the background and all you have is this beautiful Ontario lake sounds. And I found this profoundly relaxing. What gave you the idea to produce films like that with like almost zero sounds other than those of nature?
Well, thank you for saying that, and that means that that it's working, right? It was a huge leap, especially in this day and age, where we have as many cuts in those 3 hours. Well, we have maybe a third of as many cuts in those 3 hours than there is in a 30-second commercial. I mean, it's the exact opposite of where television is today, and I think maybe that's why it works. And some people do consume it all at once and sit in front of their television and watch, but I think most are doing it, the way that you did it, right? They're just sort of putting it on in the background. They're having their day. Lots of people are working at home, and maybe that's something that sort of balances their time in front of an active monitor that they're working on. How we came up with it, there was a movement in Norway about 10 years ago where a guy put a camera, and the Norwegians are pure, and their winters are longer than even those here in Ottawa. So he put a camera on the front of a train for 9 hours and played it live on the Norwegian national channel, the CBC version, and the country went crazy. They couldn't believe how great this was, and he didn't do anything. Like he didn't have any information. He just none. And then, if that wasn't enough, he traveled for 3 days on a coastal freighter, and for 3 days, the national channel had nothing but that trip live, and people would come out and hold up signs saying "Hi, Grandma," and so TVO and us kind of we talked about it, and we thought, well, can we do sort of a, a version that would be acceptable to Canadians? A Canadian version at the pace that Canadians want. And so that's when we brought the information boards in and the animation and making sure that we really leaned on a really nice soundtrack of what you were seeing. And for I guess we got the formula pretty close to right, and it's working.
I'm just curious how you sold this, like in this today's world. Like everything is 10 seconds is long, right? And you get this going for minutes and minutes on it. Anyway, it's beautiful. Congratulations on doing that. Maybe when we're off camera, I'll ask you your secrets. I don't know how to
Yeah.
sell something off the wall like that. But I have two questions about this one specifically, about the Muskokas. The perhaps I don't know if I'm a normal person or not, but the typical idea I think people have of Lake Muskoka is this is a playground for rich people from Toronto, right? And a couple of times I've been to the main one, like whatever it's called, the one where most of those mansions are, and it's like it's ridiculous, some of those mansions there. You managed to show a side of those lakes that is much more like normal person, and I appreciate that. And I wanted to ask you, because I'm going to be posting this as part of a series I have on urbanism, and it's not really urban because it's out in the lakes, but we're going to stretch the definition a little bit. What is it about those lakes when you were producing that particular show that struck you as humans doing good things with their natural environments, like humans benefiting from it, swimming, enjoying the lake, but also respecting it? Like, what is good about the way that humans treat those lakes?
Yeah, and that's interesting because the headline, as as a journalist, is rarely close to the true story. I mean, it's meant to draw eyes to it, and the headline about the Muskokas is it's a playground of the rich. But I mean, two things to answer your question. One is it was settled under the land of free grants. So it was settled for people who, I mean, the government really wanted to kind of get that protectionist border going in the north, but it was for people who wanted to go up there, and for absolutely free, they get 100 acres of land. I mean, they had to farm and create a homestead, but it was free land. And you can talk to lots and lots of folks who can trace their history easily back to those days, and back to those farms, and back to even the luxury resorts, and even the millionaires that came there. They came there as a result of those first settlers, and you still feel that there. I mean, those first settlers realized they couldn't farm, so then the hunters and fishers that were coming up from the city, they put them up in an extra room, and then they needed another extra room, and before they knew it, they were opening a lodge. And that generation of lodges sort of still exists up there. I mean, we went to one called Cleveland's House, and it's right next to this Westin. And this Westin is, I mean, it's got to be like 7 stars. It's got multiple pools, and it's Four Seasons, and it's all those things you would expect from a very high resort. And we did the shot where we see that one, and then we come back down to the water, and then we see this Cleveland's House, which is now out of business. Had been owned by one family for over 100 years. That can date back to those free home grants. In fact, that's where they settled. So it is changing. It's different, but those people are there. The guy driving the boat that you're sort of meant to be following, his great great grandfather gave the first sermon at a little boat only church that still exists up there. So there's this great grounding of people that are just regular folks. It's I think maybe even the millionaires that settled in those kinds of opulent houses, they had a real respect for the place. They,
Mm.
they built their places back from the water. They used, colors and materials that were, natural to the area. So I found it. I'd never been there before. I found it, not anything like what I'd heard it was like, and I didn't find it busy. I didn't find it. I mean, you can still take a steamboat, that was first built there in the late 1800s, and steam all through, and have lunch and have a tour and see all those places. I found it nothing like the headline. That was a long answer to a short question. I apologize.
That's okay. We got all the time in the world. There's a benefit of having your very own private little Substack is you put it out there and people will enjoy it. This is, I mean, it's in keeping with the series too. Like you're supposed to sit there and enjoy. Now, the tripping the French River was done, and we followed people in a canoe. And I saw somewhere you were asked about that, and you said, well, the people who used the French River back when that was the only highway, really, they were using canoes. In this one in the Muskokas, you're using, and I say this, I noticed this because I have a friend a good friend who has one of those antique wooden boats, and it's a special world out there if people own those really antique wooden boats. Like it's a very special crowd of people. And you've picked that. I'm sure you had other boat options for tripping the Muskokas. Why this antique wooden boat?
So the first thing that we were told up there, do you know why these boathouses are there? And we thought, well, why? And they said, well, because we have a rich history of boat building. And when you build a beautiful wooden boat, you want to put it somewhere to protect it. So that's why, and I could go on about the boathouses. There's a incredible history of boat building there. So the boat that we're on was built in the 1950s, and it's called a Playmate, and it was sort of the sort of average runabout in those days, and they built hundreds of them. The guy that is with us is a boat builder that worked there and now is kind of devoting his life to turning those gasoline powered boats into electric boats. And as soon as I spoke to him, I said, you know what, this is the guy. Like he's got a foot in both worlds. He's sort of in his late 60s, but he's doing something to change to change the way boats are appreciated. So we thought that was the perfect mix. But there were boats. The opening scene is in a boathouse where there are one-off boats, and one of those boats is worth like numerous millions of dollars. Yeah, because it's a one-off with a history.
Mm.
It was half built by the guy, Rolls Royce Rolls. I think his name was Charles Rolls. He spent time in Muskoka, and he's Brit, obviously. And he had a hand in building this one-off, boat. So it became anyway. You see them everywhere up there, like they're just ubiquitous. And when you see them, you kind of it kind of takes you back to another time.
Two more questions for you. What's
Mhm.
the next tripping? Where are you going next? If you can say.
Yeah, no, where I'd like to go, it's often a back and forth with TVO. I would love. So I said to the head of TVO at one time, John Ferry, I said, in Ottawa or Toronto, where do you think the most northern community is in Ontario? And he said, I don't know. And I said, it's Fort Severn. And we were in his offices in Toronto. And I said, it's as far from where we're sitting now as Atlanta, Georgia is. That's how big this province is. And I just don't think that as sort of Southern Ontarians, we understand how big and beautiful this province is. And I feel like it's part of what we should do, because we've been fortunate to get this series, is to bring parts of Ontario to people that can't get to some of these places. So I'd really love to do a northern place. I'd like to. There's a set of islands that I have my eye on in the north part of Lake Superior that I would really love to show Ontarians. It's when they see it, they just won't believe that it's part of this great province.
Well, we'll just ask my followers to write into TVO and tell them to, yeah, say yes.
Right.
That's a great idea. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you're burning to say?
No, it's just nice to hear because we rarely get folks that say, "Hey, I watched it and liked it." So for you to say that means a lot. So thank you for that.
All right. Well, thanks very much, and all the best with your this one and all the ones that will follow.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.